Before my life took the unexpected turn that would change everything, there was a chain of events, subtle yet pivotal, that set the stage for the unraveling of what I once believed to be a perfect existence. Growing up in a small town in North Carolina, I was always fascinated by the stars. My father, a retired Air Force pilot, used to take me to the open fields at night to gaze at constellations and share stories about his flights. It was during those moments, under the vast expanse of the night sky, that my passion for aerospace was born. Little did I know those childhood dreams would eventually lead me to a career at space conquest, but also to unforeseen personal battles. In high school, I was the quintessential overachiever, captain of the soccer team, president of the science club, and valedictorian of my class. But beneath the accolades was a restless energy, a desire to prove myself beyond the confines of our sleepy town. That drive led me to enlist in the Marines right after graduation. The discipline, the camaraderie, and the sheer intensity of military life shaped me in ways I could never have imagined. I learned resilience, leadership, and the harsh realities of trust and betrayal, lessons that would echo throughout my life. It was during my final deployment overseas that I first experienced the complexities of human relationships under stress. I served alongside men and women who, like me, were grappling with the dual pressures of duty and personal sacrifice. One particular comrade, Sergeant Mark Dawson, confided in me about his failing marriage back home, a story that resonated deeply when my own life began to mirror his years later. The military taught me how to navigate external conflicts, but it was woefully silent on handling the emotional landmines that awaited back in civilian life. After returning stateside and completing my service, I threw myself into my studies with a singular focus, earning both my undergraduate and master's degrees in aerospace engineering. As our relationship with Tracy blossomed, we built a life filled with shared dreams and mutual respect. We celebrated milestones from our wedding day to the births of our 3 beautiful children, and navigated the everyday challenges of parenthood and careers. Our home was filled with laughter, love, and the comforting predictability of routine. Yet beneath the surface, subtle cracks began to form, unnoticed at first, but slowly widening with time. Looking back, I realized there were signs I chose to ignore. Tracy's increasing preoccupation with work, her subtle emotional distance, and the unspoken tensions that crept into our conversations were all harbingers of the storm that was to come. But I was too wrapped up in my own world, the demands of my job at Space Conquest, the pride of providing for my family, and the naive belief that love, once established, was unbreakable. It wasn't until everything fell apart that I truly understood how fragile the foundation of our life together had become. Many husbands have said, everything was perfect, until suddenly, it wasn't. I was no exception. My name is Blake Ramsey, and at 31, I had the life most men dream of. I worked at Space Conquest, a division of a major aerospace firm, contributing to NASA's latest crewed spacecraft. This cutting-edge vehicle, a fully automated winged craft designed to carry 8 passengers, was similar to the Air Force's X-37B, but on a larger scale. My role was to engineer the emergency escape system, ensuring each crew member could eject safely in a pressurized capsule at any stage, takeoff, ascent, or re-entry. It was a job I was passionate about, something I had always aspired to as an aerospace engineer. At home, I had a wonderful family. My wife Tracy and I had been together for 7 years, raising our 3 children, Tyler, our 7-year-old son, and our 6-year-old twin daughters, Beth and Emily. We lived in a comfortable 4-bedroom house in a great neighborhood with loving grandparents close enough to be actively involved in our kids' lives. Tracy's sister Lucy was nearby as well. Tracy and I met in graduate school. Between my undergraduate and master's degrees, I served 4 years in the Marines, which helped fund my education. We hit it off quickly and got married soon after graduation. I secured a great job in aerospace while Tracy worked as a paralegal until she decided to stay home with the kids. Life was good, until it wasn't. When the twins started kindergarten, Tracy returned to work at the law firm. At first, I didn't notice the changes, trusting her completely. But soon I saw the signs. She started dressing differently, our closeness faded, and her work hours grew longer. Whenever I asked, she brushed it off, insisting she had an incredible opportunity working under a senior partner. I'd met her boss, Stanley Cross, several times. He was the arrogant founder of the firm, dismissive toward me from the start. Whenever I visited Tracy at work, his behavior struck me as controlling, though I ignored any real concerns. Maybe I didn't want to see them. Then everything unraveled. The kids were spending a weekend with my parents, giving Tracy and me some much-needed alone time. I was looking forward to reconnecting, but when I walked through the door, she was descending the stairs in a tight black cocktail dress, heels, and flawless makeup. She looked stunning. "Wow," I said, smiling. "If I'd known we had plans, I would have come home earlier. Give me a second to get ready. Where are we going?" She gave me a cold smile. "We're not going anywhere," she replied, stressing the way. "I'm going out, but not with you." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "I have a date with Stanley Cross, and this is just the beginning." My stomach dropped. "What the hell are you talking about?" She stayed composed. "Calm down. This is just how things are now. I'll be back Sunday afternoon." "Like hell you will," I shot back. "If you walk out that door, don't bother coming back." She didn't hesitate. "No, Blake, I will come back. We're staying married. Nothing changes except that I'll also be with Stan. If you fight this, you'll be the one out of the house. And let's be real, do you really want to risk losing everything?" I stood frozen, struggling to process her words. "Now," she continued coolly, "sit down. Let me explain how this is going to work. I'd rather you hear it from me before Stan gets here in 30 minutes. If he has to explain, you'll like it even less." I clenched my fists. "If that fool shows up here, he's getting his A kicked in 31. Her smirk didn't waver. "That would be a mistake. First, because Stan has influence, you don't want to cross him. Second, his bodyguard Max is coming with him. He's big, mean, and doesn't have much patience. If you try anything, you won't come out of it in one piece." A familiar sensation crept over me, the kind I hadn't felt since my time in the Marines. I was in an ambush, caught between my wife and her lover, and I had no plan of attack. I turned and headed upstairs. "Where do you think you're going?" she called. "We need to talk," I replied. "But first, I'm changing. Give me 5 minutes." In the Marines, I learned 3 survival rules in an ambush. First, recognize the trap. Too late for that. Second, find cover. I walked into our bedroom, my temporary safe zone. Third, plan an escape. I needed one fast. I changed into casual clothes and slipped my phone into my chest pocket, setting it to record. Then I knelt by an old wooden chest marked Captain B.C. Ramsey, United States Marine Corps. Peeling back layers of old uniforms, documents, and medals, I reached for Betsy, my Marine-issued 9mm Beretta, along with 2 loaded magazines. Technically, I shouldn't have kept it, but a conveniently misplaced discharge form ensured I did. That weapon had saved my life before. As I loaded the tool, Tracy's voice rang from downstairs. "Get down here, Blake, or you'll regret it." "I'm coming," I replied, tucking the pistol into my waistband beneath my shirt. Before stepping out, I glanced at my phone, still recording, and adjusted it to capture as much as possible. If Tracy wanted to confess, I wanted every word on tape. I entered the living room to find her at the dining table sipping white wine. A cold beer sat across from her, waiting for me. "It's time," she said evenly. "We need to figure this out before Stan arrives." I took a seat, leaning back. "Sounds like you have something to get off your chest. Let's hear it." Her voice softened. "I love you, Blake. You're my husband, and I want to grow old with you. I don't want to hurt you." "Cut the act, Tracy," I interrupted. "Just say what you really mean." She frowned, but pressed on. "Things have changed. I'm with Stan. I've been his lover for months. This is how things are now, and you need to accept it." I clenched my jaw, but said nothing, letting her keep talking. It started as harmless flirting when I went back to work. Then I became his personal assistant. We spent more time together, and one night it just happened. I didn't fight it. I wanted it. "So you just threw our marriage away?" I asked. "That doesn't mean I don't love you," she said smoothly. "I still want our life together." I took a slow sip of my beer, letting the weight of her words sink in. "Why are you telling me now?" She shrugged. "Stan and I are tired of sneaking around. We want to go out together, travel. The only way to do that is if you're on board." I let out a bitter laugh. "Good luck with that." She reached for my hand, but I pulled away. "We're not divorcing," she insisted. "I'll be with Stan, but I'll still be your wife. I'll stay here with the kids most nights, but some nights I'll sleep at his place. He's giving me a raise, so we'll have more money. For vacations, the kids' college, even that lake cabin you love." I set my beer down. "You really think I want anything paid for with money from your affair?" Her eyes darkened. "I'm not some hooker, Blake. I'm an asset to his firm. Being with him is part of the business." I stared at her, incredulous. "This won't last forever," she continued. Maybe 2 or 3 years. Then I'll be your faithful wife again and we'll go back to normal." I stared at her, speechless, as she said, "Stan wants to be friends with you. He thinks we can share me, as long as you play by his rules. He knows I love you and that I'll still want to be with you sometimes. He just wants to visit occasionally, maybe even be like an uncle to the kids." I felt my anger spike, but kept my voice level. "He will never go near my kids. Understand?" She shrugged like I was overreacting. "Stan's married to some young aristocrat, but she can't have kids. He wants his own." "He can adopt," I snapped. "He wants biological kids, but doesn't think he'd make a good dad. He wants them raised in a loving home," she mumbled, not meeting my eyes. It clicked. My stomach twisted. "He wants to get you pregnant, doesn't he? And I'm supposed to raise his kid?" "It wouldn't be illegitimate," she said deadpan. "It'd be our child to love. The baby would have Stan's last name, and he'd pay us well to raise it." I stared at her in disbelief. "Are you pregnant?" "No," she replied casually. "But he wants me off the pills soon. I told him I'd talk to you first." I shook my head, still stunned. "Good luck with that." Her eyes narrowed. "You'll change your mind." Before I could answer, the doorbell rang. Tracy practically flew to the door, and in walked Stan Cross, his arms slung around her waist like he owned her. "This just keeps getting better," I muttered. "How'd he take it?" Stan asked Tracy like he was asking about the weather. "Not well," she replied. "I think you need to lay out the consequences." Stan chuckled. "Time for plan B." Cross was tall, maybe 6'2", with a slight gut but enough confidence to fill the room. His graying hair and tailored suit screamed power. He strutted right up to me, invading my space. "Mr. Ramsey, we need to talk," he said smugly. "I should break your face," I shot back, fists tight. "You could try," he sneered. "But my driver would have you unconscious before you even swung. You'd be in jail tonight, so sit." I glanced at the mountain of a man outside. I wasn't scared, but I was curious. I sat down, fists still clenched. "Good," Stan said smoothly. "Here's the deal. Tracy's my assistant and my lover. You stay married, play happy family, while I take care of her needs. Sometimes we'll even use your bed." "You're delusional if you think I'm accepting this," I growled. "I'll divorce her before I live like that." Stan grinned like he'd been waiting for me to say that. "Go ahead, but I'm the best lawyer in town. You'll lose your house, your savings, and your kids. And that's just the start." He leaned in, voice low and menacing. "You'll be accused of abusing your kids. You'll rot in prison, never see your kids again, and lose your job. Your friends will disappear. Your life will be over." I sat there trying to process just how far they were willing to go. Stan kept talking, calm but threatening. "Don't be stupid. Try to warn my wife, and everything I just said will happen. And if that's not enough, my driver and his friends will make sure you're never the same again. Run, my PIs will find you. Accept this, and things stay easy." I turned to Tracy. "You'd really do this to me?" She shrugged. "I don't want to, Blake, but I will if you don't play along. Eventually, you'll see this is just how it is now." I watched them move toward the door, but I wasn't done. "Before you leave, I've got something to say." Stan sighed, annoyed. "What now?" I smiled coldly. "After I have a drink to celebrate my freedom, I'm calling your wife to tell her everything. Then I'll call Tracy's sister Lucy and let her break the news to your family." Stan blinked, caught off guard. "What did you just say?" he growled. I didn't repeat myself. "Tomorrow morning I'm changing all the locks." Tracy frowned, trying to process what I was saying. "And after that," I continued, "I'm inviting our neighbor Kate over for dinner. You know, the one who's been flirting with me since her husband died. She's older than you, Tracy, but has the body of a goddess. Showed me her bikini just this morning. I wasn't thinking about leaving you before, but now things have changed." Tracy's face twisted in rage. "Blake, you can't do this." "Oh, I can," I shot back. "And when you come home Sunday, all your stuff will be on the lawn. Clothes, jewelry, everything. Even our wedding album. Better grab it before the sprinklers hit." Stan's face turned red, fists clenching. Tracy looked like she might cry. "And one last thing," I added. "Monday morning I'm meeting with a divorce lawyer. I'll file for divorce for infidelity and name you, Stan, as a co-defendant. I'll also sue for alienation of affection and your firm for violating workplace rules. Even if the lawsuits get thrown out, the public mess will humiliate you and your firm." Stanley snapped. He threw Tracy's bag across the room and stormed over, jabbing his finger into my chest. "Listen, you idiot," he snarled. "I'm Stanley Cross. I run the biggest law firm in this city. I'll ruin your life by tonight. You'll be in jail before Tracy and I hit the hotel." He leaned in, breath hot in my face. "Think being innocent will protect you? I've been practicing law for 30 years. I own the cops, the DA, even the judges. Politicians, too. I made them." I let him rant. "You go out with Kate tomorrow? The cops will find something in your car. Or they'll get a tip about child films on your computer. You'll spend years fighting that, and no lawyer will touch your case. Meanwhile, I'll still have your wife. Got it?" I stared him down. "I believe every word, a-hole." His eyes narrowed. "Watch it. Call me sir or Mr. Cross. If you call me that again, Max will teach you some respect." That's when he jabbed me again. And that's when I snapped. I grabbed his hand and twisted, breaking every finger. Cross stared at his mangled hand in shock before letting out a howl of pain. Tracy screamed, rushing to his side. "You're dead!" Cross bellowed. He turned to the door, shouting, "Max, get in here now!" The door burst open, and Max, a towering, muscle-bound figure, strode in. "Yes, Mr. Cross," he rumbled. Cradling his broken hand, Cross pointed at me with his good one. "Handle him, Max." Max advanced, fists clenched, but I was ready. As he moved, I pulled the Beretta from my waistband. "Max," I said calmly, "back off. You don't want this." He froze, reading the seriousness in my eyes. I wasn't bluffing. I aimed the tool at Cross. "Call your wife. Now." Cross glared, but pulled out his phone, realizing he had no choice. "Speakerphone," I ordered. When she answered, I spoke. "Mrs. Cross, your husband and my wife have been having an affair for 6 months. They're heading to a hotel now. When I objected, your husband sent Max to deal with me." Silence. Then she whispered, "He told me he was at our Palm Springs house working." "He lied," I replied. "He's here, in my house." I turned the phone toward Tracy, now a sobbing mess on the floor, makeup streaked down her face. "This is my wife dressed for her night with your husband." "Oh my God," she whispered. "Yeah, I've got to go. The cops will be here soon." I tossed the phone on the floor and looked at Cross. "Well, a-hole," I said, "your wife knows." "What now? Gonna send Max to finish me off? Because Max isn't doing much of anything." Cross's bravado crumbled. Tracy just sobbed quietly in the corner. "Tracy," I snapped, "get my briefcase, and you'll be scrubbing your boyfriend's blood out of the carpet later." Shaking, she obeyed. I opened it, pulled out my laptop, and turned it to Cross. "Planning to plant evidence on this, weren't you?" I sneered. Without hesitation, I flipped it over and shot 2 rounds into the hard drive. The crack of shots echoed through the house. I leaned in close to Cross's ear. "Good luck planning anything now." I told Tracy to grab a towel and stop Max's bleeding. She obeyed, trembling. "No one moves until the cops get here," I warned. "An ambulance won't be far behind." I went to the kitchen to clean up, but my phone's battery was nearly dead, still recording. "If Cross is as connected as he claims, this evidence could disappear," I muttered. I hid the phone under dish towels in a drawer, praying it wouldn't be found. I splashed cold water on my face. My nose was bleeding, one eye swollen shut, and my head pounding. Concussion, maybe, but that was the least of my worries. I returned to the living room. Everyone stayed frozen in place. "Stay put until the cops arrive," I said, stepping out onto the porch. A crowd had gathered outside, neighbors watching with wide eyes. One of them called out, "Blake, were those bangs?" "Yeah," I said flatly. "Anyone call emergency?" 2 hands shot up. One of them belonged to my neighbor and best friend, retired Marine Colonel Orson Sage. We shared beers and old war stories. I called him Colonel. He called me Captain. "You good, Captain?" he asked, scanning me for injuries. "You should see the other guys," I joked, though my pounding head made it hard to smile. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. "Colonel," I said, "I need a favor." "Anything, Captain." I handed him Betsy, my Beretta, and Max's revolver. "Unload these and set them down. I don't want to be holding a weapon when the cops get here." He quickly disarmed both, placing the tools and ammo neatly beside me. Just then, Kate, my widowed neighbor from across the street, rushed over, her eyes widening at the sight of my battered face. "Blake, you look awful," she gasped, steadying me. "I'm feeling a little dizzy," I admitted. "Might have taken a harder hit than I thought." Kate helped me sit on the porch just as 2 cop cars screeched to a halt, lights flashing, sirens blaring. Officers jumped out, hands hovering over their weapons. Colonel Sage stepped forward, hands raised. "There's no threat here, officers," he assured them, nodding at the unloaded tools. "He's not a danger." An officer glanced at me. "Anyone else inside?" Yeah, I replied. 3 people. One's hurt bad. The cop eyed my bruises. Looks like you could use some help too. 2 ambulances arrived moments later. EMTs rushed in, and one officer said, "There's a man inside with shot wounds." Meanwhile, my vision blurred, and my head spun harder. Kate noticed right away. "Blake, you need to lie down," she urged. An EMT checked my vitals. I told him my forearm felt broken. Everything started to fade after that. I vaguely remember Max being wheeled out on a stretcher, cross-cradling his broken hand as they loaded him into an ambulance. Tracy followed next, escorted by a female cop. When she saw me slumped on the porch, she burst into tears. "Blake, I'm so sorry. I never wanted this," she sobbed, reaching out. I raised my good hand, shoving her away. "Go to hell, Tracy." The officer pulled her back, her cries fading as they led her to a squad car. After that, everything went black. I woke up 3 days later, my vision blurry. A soft voice broke through the haze. "Mr. Blake, can you hear me?" As my sight cleared, I saw an older nurse, maybe in her 60s, with kind eyes hovering over me. "You've been out for 3 days," she said gently. I croaked. "I'm in a hospital, huh?" She smiled softly. "Yes, Mercy General, I'm Rose. You're safe now." Once alone, I took stock of the damage. My right forearm was in a cast, my nose was taped up, and my left eye was bandaged. Even the slightest touch sent sharp jolts of pain through me. I was hooked to a bunch of machines, and to top it off, I felt the uncomfortable tug of a catheter. Perfect. Rose came back with Dr. York, who gave me the rundown. Fractured forearm, broken nose, and a nasty shiner. "You'll recover," he assured me. The concussion had kept me unconscious for a while, and they'd given me something to help me sleep through the night. I drifted off again, exhausted. When I woke the next morning, something felt wrong. My left wrist was cuffed to the bed frame. "What the hell?" I muttered, tugging at the metal. A voice drifted from the shadowed corner of the room. "Relax, Mr. Ramsey." I turned my head. A middle-aged man in a rumpled suit stepped into view, his badge glinting under the harsh fluorescent light. "They said you'd be waking up about now," he added. I scowled. "Why the cuffs? You think I'm about to run a marathon like this?" The man ignored the sarcasm, pulling out a notepad. "I'm Detective Sergeant Hardman. We're not worried about you running. We're worried about you escaping." "Escaping what?" I snapped. "You're under arrest," he said, his tone flat and unforgiving. My pulse quickened. "For what?" Hardman didn't even blink. "Attack with intent to homicide. Attack with a deadly weapon, spousal misuse, illegal use of a firearm." The words hit me like a punch to the chest. The room spun. Where the hell is this nonsense coming from? Stanley Cross filed the complaint. Max Angel and your wife, Tracy, corroborated it. Of course they did. Without another word, Hardman read me my rights in that same monotone, then turned on his heel and left the room. The door clicked shut behind him, leaving me alone with the sharp buzz of my own thoughts. A few minutes later, the door creaked open again. Rose, the nurse, slipped inside to check my vitals. Her footsteps were soft, but I heard them like thunder. "You knew?" I asked, rattling the cuffs against the bed frame. She paused, her eyes soft with pity. She nodded. "I'm sorry." I stared at her, my chest tight. "None of it's true, Rose." I managed a weak smile. "When this is over, I owe you dinner." She smiled faintly. "I believe you, but it better be somewhere fancy." Later, Dr. York returned to say I'd be moved to another ward soon. Hardman came back with a couple of orderlies, and they wheeled me to a secure floor. A guard stood at the door. They uncuffed me, figuring the locked room was enough, and reconnected me to the machines. Before leaving, Hardman said, "You'll be formally charged via video in a few days. Got a lawyer?" "No." "I'll send a public defender." The room went quiet, leaving me too much time to think. I kept replaying that night. My wrecked marriage, my kids, where were they? What had they been told? And my job? I'd been AWOL for days. 5 days later, my public defender showed up, a young guy named Sam Wilton. He seemed to know the charges, but didn't seem interested in my side of things. He rattled off the same list of accusations and handed me the paperwork. "You'll be arraigned tomorrow at 10 a.m. "How do you want to handle this?" he asked. "If you plead to some lesser charges, I might negotiate a deal." "I'm not guilty," I snapped. "What about my kids?" He checked his notes. "Your wife stayed with her sister. The kids were told you're away for work." I clenched my teeth. "Contact my boss. Tell him what's going on." As I skimmed the paperwork, one charge jumped out. "Spousal misuse?" "Tracy claims you kick her," Sam said. pulling out photos of bruises on her face and arm. "I never touched her," I said firmly. Sam didn't seem convinced. I held back the rest of my story. Cross probably had influence even here. "You've got 3 witnesses lined up against you," Sam said. "If you take a deal, you might avoid prison time, but civil suits are coming either way." The thought of being punished for something I didn't do made me sick. The civil suits would ruin me financially. "No deals," I said. "Plead not guilty." Sam sighed. "All right, but getting you bail won't be easy. The DA thinks you're dangerous." I met his gaze. "You don't believe me, do you?" He didn't answer. I didn't mention the recording on my phone. It could clear me, but I wasn't ready to risk it. Not until I knew who I could trust. Instead, I told Sam to find my uncle. "Do you have a lawyer in mind?" he asked. "Not exactly," I replied. "But my uncle, Jack Carter, might as well be. He served in the Navy Advocate Corps, worked his way from defense attorney to prosecutor to judge in the Navy's Attorney General's office, retired as a captain, passed the California bar, practiced family law in San Francisco, and now he volunteers as a child advocate. I didn't have Jack's contact info, but I gave Sam enough details. Find him. Don't tell anyone. Just say I'm facing serious charges, I'm innocent, and I need his help." Later that evening, Sam called back. "Your uncle will be here in 2 days. He told me to remind you. Don't discuss your case with anyone. Just plead not guilty." The next day, I was arraigned via video from the hospital. The charges were read, and I answered the same way each time. Not guilty. The prosecutor claimed I was violent and dangerous, pushing for no bail. The judge agreed. I'd stay in the hospital 2 more days, then be transferred to county jail to await a hearing. The day before my transfer, Uncle Jack arrived. He filed paperwork to represent me and got clearance to visit. Seeing him after everything nearly broke me. I hugged him, letting out emotions I didn't know I had left. Once we were alone, Jack leaned in. "All right, Blake, tell me everything." I detailed the threats, the fight, and how I defended myself. Jack listened quietly, though I saw disbelief flicker in his eyes. "That's one hell of a mess," he muttered. I lowered my voice. "They made up a whole new version of that night, but I've got proof. It's all recorded on my iPhone." Jack's face didn't change, but I saw the relief in his eyes. "Where's the phone?" he asked. "In the kitchen drawer at my house," I whispered. He nodded. "All right, getting it won't be easy, but we'll figure it out." He sat back. "Don't worry, Blake. I've got your back. You focus on healing. I'll handle the rest." Jack outlined his plan: dig into the case, build a defense, and fight for bail. "Hang in there. I'll check on the kids too. Lucy seems to believe you." After I was discharged from the hospital, they transferred me to city jail. 3 days passed without any word from Uncle Jack, and I started to worry. But just when I was losing hope, I was called to court, and there he was, standing confidently before the judge. Jack convinced the judge to grant bail under house arrest. He rented a townhouse in a gated community for me and moved in himself to keep an eye on things. I wasn't allowed to leave the premises. "Don't stress, Blake," he said as we settled in. "I've got a few tricks up my sleeve." But he kept the details to himself, focusing on the next steps. He hired private investigators, but the biggest challenge was retrieving my phone, the key evidence. "We can't break into your house," Jack reminded me. "And with the restraining order, you can't go near it. But we'll figure it out." Meanwhile, Jack set up secure phone lines, and one of my first calls was to my neighbor, Colonel Orson Sage. "Colonel, it's Blake," I said when he picked up. "Thought I'd update you on everything." "I've been wondering about you, Captain," he replied. "And there's something going on at your place you should know." I relayed this to Jack, who immediately said, "Invite him over. Let's see what he knows." That evening, over beers and grilled steaks, the Colonel leaned in. "About a week after everything happened before Tracy moved back in, I heard Semper barking like crazy. Looked outside and saw 2 guys in dark clothes flashing lights at your garage." "What did you do?" I asked. "Called emergency first," he grinned. "Then grabbed my bat and took Semper with me. They didn't see me coming. I crept up while they were picking the lock." "And?" Jack pressed. "I told them they picked the wrong house to rob," he chuckled. "One of them stepped toward me, but when Semper growled and I raised the bat, they bolted. Jumped into a black SUV with the plates covered." "What happened when the cops arrived?" Jack asked. "Filled them in. They noticed the crime scene tape was still up, checked around for half an hour, and left." Jack frowned. "Cross threatened to plant substances in Blake's car. This sounds like his work." He turned to me. "Good thing the Colonel moved your car." But the Colonel wasn't done. 2 days after Tracy moved back, I saw that same SUV parked out front. 2 guys were talking to her in the garage. She pointed to where your car used to be. After about 45 minutes, they left. but not before I got their plate this time. Jack's eyes lit up. He ran the plate through his contacts and found it belonged to Unique Services, a shady private investigation firm. Digging deeper, he uncovered more dirt. The only employees are Jose Gonzalez and Miguel Ortega, Jack said. Jose quit after being linked to evidence theft. Miguel was fired for falsifying reports. And guess who their client is? Jack added with a grin. Stanley Cross. We needed that phone. Jack had a plan. I'm going to call Tracy, he said. I'll tell her I want to settle this quietly. She knows me from family events, might trust me. When he called, Tracy sounded hesitant. I'll call you back tomorrow, she said cautiously. She called later, agreeing to meet at 6 p.m., but added, my lawyer insists one of his colleagues attend. Jack agreed without hesitation. That evening, Jack rang the doorbell at my house. Tracy answered quickly, giving him a polite hug. She wore a conservative skirt and blouse, her hair pulled back. Inside, a young man in a suit stood in the living room. Tracy introduced him as Gordon Merritt from Cross's firm. After quick handshakes, Tracy went to get coffee. When she left, Merritt placed a recorder on the table. I'll be recording this, he said. Jack smiled, pulling out his own recorder. Fair enough. Jack opened the conversation casually. I'm sorry things got out of hand. You and Blake always seemed happy. Tracy sighed. I never wanted it to go this far, Uncle Jack. It's all spiraled out of control. Jack nodded. Blake says you and Cross were having an affair. He claims seeing Cross at the house pushed him over the edge, and that Cross's bodyguard started the fight. Merritt leaned forward. The evidence against Mr. Ramsey is solid. Testimonies and physical proof. Jack stayed calm. That's why I'm hoping Tracy can testify Blake acted out of emotional distress. He's been a great husband and father until now. Merritt considered it. We might consider that if Mr. Ramsey pleads guilty. Jack raised an eyebrow. All the charges? I'll need to consult Mr. Cross, Merritt replied. He's got influence with the DA. We might cut a deal to avoid publicity. Jack nodded, preparing to leave. Thanks for your time, Tracy. Blake wants you to tell the kids he loves them. Tracy's eyes welled up, but before Jack left, his tone hardened. Tracy, if I can prove Blake's story, you'll face perjury and obstruction charges. Both carry prison time. Merritt opened his mouth, but Jack cut him off. And you, counselor, if you knew your client was lying, you'll be prosecuted too. With that, Jack stood up. Mind if I grab a glass of water before I go? No, of course not, Tracy stammered, pointing to the kitchen. In the kitchen, Jack made noise with the fridge, then quietly reached into the drawer by the sink. He felt around the dish towels until his fingers closed around my iPhone. He slipped it into his pocket, poured some water, and returned to the living room. Anything else before I go? Jack asked. Tracy glanced nervously at Merritt, who shook his head. We're done here. We'll be in touch. Jack smiled coolly. Looking forward to it. See you in court, Mr. Merritt. Jack didn't bring the phone back immediately. Instead, he took it to Digital Analysis Solutions, DAS, explaining the situation and stressing how critical the video evidence was. DAS assured him they'd handle it carefully. When DAS called, they invited us to the DA's office to review the findings. They'd backed up everything from my phone, copies on DVDs, flash drives, and the cloud. This evidence is safe, the DAS director assured us. It can't be lost or destroyed. Jack turned to me. She's toxic, Blake. You know what you need to do. I do, Uncle Jack, I said firmly. Afterward, I called the gate security at the townhouse. Let her in, I instructed. Minutes before Tracy arrived, I rushed to tidy up. Hid legal papers, tossed empty beer cans, loaded the dishwasher, and changed into slacks and a knit shirt. I didn't bother shaving. The stubble gave me a tougher look. When she knocked, I opened the door. She was dressed to impress. Too much so. A red pleated skirt, pink cashmere sweater slightly unbuttoned, perfectly styled hair, and subtle makeup with lipstick matching her nails. Come in, Tracy, I said, stepping aside. You look great. Thanks, Blake, she replied softly. You look good too, lean and handsome. I've had time for the gym, I shrugged. Eating clean helps. I motioned to the couch. Have a seat. I'll get you some wine. I handed her a glass of white and sat with my red, masking the anger simmering beneath the surface. After a few sips, I cut to the chase. Why are you here, Tracy? She set her glass down, fingers lingering on the stem. I know things are a mess, Blake, but I still love you. I chuckled bitterly. Right. You thought I'd just accept your little arrangement with Cross. Let you have your fun while I played the loyal husband, and we'd make a fortune off it, right? Her eyes dropped. In a year, it would have been over. I'd be yours again. For good. Well, sorry for messing up your perfect plan, I snapped. It wasn't my plan, she shot back. It was Stanley's. He thought he could scare you. He's done it before. We didn't expect you to fight back. That's why he thought I was weak, I said flatly. She shivered slightly. I was scared when I saw how violent you were. I've kept that part buried since the Marines, I said, but it's not who I am now. Then, out of nowhere, she asked, Where's your car? I laughed. Somewhere safe. After Cross threatened to plant substances in it, I made sure it disappeared. I narrowed my eyes. Speaking of which, who were those guys snooping around after you moved back in? They seemed real interested in the garage. She hesitated. They were supposed to plant evidence in your car. I didn't want it, but Stanley insisted. He wanted to ruin you. And you didn't mind lying to put me in prison? I snapped. If you love me like you say, tell the truth. Get the charges dropped. I can't, she whispered. I'm in too deep. Stanley controls everything. Whatever he says becomes reality. That's your problem, I muttered. I leaned forward. What about the misuse charges? The photos of your bruises? I never laid a finger on you. She looked away, voice barely a whisper. That was Stanley. Right after you went outside, he made up the story and told Max and me exactly what to say. To make it believable, he knocked me himself. She swallowed hard. We practiced the story until we had it perfect. Her eyes filled with tears. I'm sorry, Blake. I never wanted this. I want us back. That's never happening, I said coldly. Her expression hardened briefly, then softened. There's another way out, she murmured, leaning in. Stanley knows about your military service, your PTSD. He wants you to plead guilty, blame it on that. He'll pull strings to get you into a VA hospital instead of prison. In a year, maybe less, you'll be released. I'll be waiting. We can start over with the kids. So that was the plan. Confess, and Cross would make sure I got a lighter sentence. I didn't believe a word, but kept my cool. That sounds good, Tracy, I said, nodding, but I need time to think. I'll talk to Uncle Jack. He's struggling to build a case with all the evidence you, Cross, and Max have stacked up. Her eyes welled up. Please, Blake, she whispered. Do this for us, for the kids. In a few years, it'll feel like none of this ever happened. I stared at her. I doubt that. I leaned in, my voice sharp. You slept with another man for months. You expected me to accept it. You threatened to take my kids if I didn't comply. And you lied, trying to put me in prison. This isn't just a rough patch, Tracy. She sniffled, wiping her eyes. That's why you should take Stanley's offer. It's the easiest way out. Like I said, I'll think about it, I replied, signaling the conversation was over. We're done here. She placed her hand on mine, eyes pleading. Maybe we could relax together tonight, she whispered. I miss you in bed. Maybe we can forget everything for just one night. That's not happening, Tracy, I said, yanking my hand away. You disgust me. Finally realizing I was serious, she stood, wiping her tears. Please consider Stanley's offer, she murmured as I walked her to the door. She tried to hug me, but I stayed stone still. Without another word, she left. The day of the hearing arrived, its goal clear, to decide if I should be detained for further investigation. The prosecution was confident, as expected. They called Cross, Max, and Tracy to testify, each delivering their rehearsed stories. Uncle Jack approached each witness with a single question. Do you swear your testimony is the truth? All three answered yes, without hesitation. Jack didn't press further. He had a bigger plan. While Jack wanted to expose Jose and Miguel for attempting to frame me, their failed efforts weren't relevant to the current charges, but that wouldn't matter for long. When the prosecution rested, Uncle Jack stood, calm and deliberate. Your Honor, the defense would like to introduce a video recording of the incident. This evidence is exculpatory. The assistant DA shot up. This evidence wasn't shared with the prosecution. Jack was ready. There's a reason. The defense fears the DA's office and the court may be biased and could destroy this evidence. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs as tension thickened in the air. The judge rapped his gavel once, silencing the crowd, then fixed his narrowed eyes on the defense table. Do you have proof the DA's office is compromised, Mr. Carter? He asked, his tone sharp and skeptical. Jack Carter, my uncle and lead counsel, rose from his chair with deliberate calm. The proof is on the video, Your Honor. The judge's frown deepened. Both parties will meet in my chambers for me to review the tape. But Uncle Jack didn't budge. He shook his head slowly. No, Your Honor, we won't. A ripple of surprise moved through the courtroom. The judge's face darkened. And why not, Mr. Carter? Jack's voice was steady, unwavering. Because we don't believe this court is impartial. We won't risk having the evidence suppressed. A gasp echoed from the gallery. The judge's glare hardened, his jaw clenched tight. Are you accusing this court of corruption? Jack met the judge's gaze without flinching. Perhaps, he said evenly. The courtroom fell into a stunned silence, the tension now suffocating. The judge's voice sliced through it, sharp as a blade. Can you prove that, Mr. Carter, or is that also on the video? Jack's lips curled into a slight, knowing smile. It is, he replied smoothly. But I can give you an example right now, if you're willing to answer a few questions. The judge crossed his arms over his chest, his eyes narrowing into slits. You think you can prove bias by questioning me? Yes, Your Honor, Jack affirmed without hesitation. A beat of silence. Then the judge leaned forward, his voice low and dangerous. Go ahead. But if you fail, Mr. Carter, we'll review that video in my chambers, immediately. I agree, Jack said. But if this evidence is suppressed and my client is convicted, I'll release the video to every news outlet I can find. The public will see it, and your integrity will be questioned. The judge's face reddened. I feel threatened, Mr. Carter. Before the judge could proceed, Jack Carter's voice cut through the silence. Your eldest son is at the Air Force Academy, isn't he, Your Honor? The judge's expression tightened, his posture stiffening behind the bench. Yes, he's a freshman, Jack nodded, his tone calm but probing. Getting into the academy is highly competitive. Your son would have needed a nomination from a congressman or senator, passed rigorous exams and physicals, and submitted several recommendation letters, correct? The judge's jaw clenched. Yes, he replied, his voice clipped. Jack took a deliberate step forward. And who wrote those letters? A flicker of hesitation crossed the judge's face. His swimming coach, his math teacher. Jack's gaze sharpened. And the third? The pause this time was longer. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath as the judge finally muttered, Mr. Stanley Cross wrote the third recommendation. A murmur swept through the room, whispers bouncing off the courtroom walls. Jack seized the moment. So, Mr. Cross knows your son well? The judge's face hardened, but his voice betrayed a hint of defensiveness. My son worked in Mr. Cross's office during the summers. He wants to be a lawyer. So Mr. Cross is more than a casual acquaintance, Jack pressed. You're connected professionally. The judge clenched his jaw but said nothing. Now you see why the defense questions your impartiality, Jack concluded. The judge sat silently before finally speaking. You've questioned my integrity, counselor, but perception matters, he sighed. Play your video. Jack nodded to the bailiff to dim the lights. 2 large screens dropped on either side of the judge's bench. Jack glanced at me with a small smile. Showtime, Blake. He hit play. The courtroom sat in stunned silence as the footage revealed the threats and manipulation. On screen, Cross sneered. I know most of the senior police officials. I'm friends with many DA lawyers. I've even slept with some of them. A gasp echoed from the prosecution bench. The assistant DA buried her head in her hands, sobbing, then hurriedly packed her briefcase and fled the courtroom in tears. Cross, Max, and Tracy tried to slip out quietly, but the judge's voice boomed, Sit down, now. As the video played to its damning conclusion, Jack stood. I have another video, Your Honor. Without waiting for permission, he queued up the second video. This was recorded 2 weeks ago when my wife visited me at my townhouse. Tracy's face went pale. On screen, she confessed to everything. Cross's threats, the false story, and the plan to frame me. As the courtroom watched, Tracy screamed at me in the video, Blake, how could you do this to me? But it was too late. Cross's face turned red with rage. You stupid witch, he snarled. You let him record you? What were you thinking? The evidence was overwhelming. The DA's office requested a recess to review the new information. Jack handed over copies of the videos. The trial was adjourned until the next morning. When court resumed, Cross, Max, and Tracy were nowhere to be found. This time, the actual district attorney sat at the prosecution table. The judge gave him the floor. I'll be brief, Your Honor, he began. First, all charges against Mr. Ramsey are dropped. He acted in self-defense. He paused before continuing. Second, we've issued arrest warrants for Mr. Stanley Cross, Mr. Max Angel, and Mrs. Tracy Ramsey for conspiracy, perjury, attack, filing false reports, and obstruction of justice. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs. Additionally, the DA added, we've confirmed Cross attempted to plant false evidence against Mr. Ramsey. 2 of his associates are being arrested as we speak. Cross, Max, and Tracy were soon arrested. They posted bail, but the fallout wasn't over. The DA launched an internal investigation into Cross's long-standing influence over the legal system, rooting out corrupt colleagues. Eventually, all defendants were convicted. Cross arrogantly tried to defend himself, but it backfired. Max and Tracy pled guilty and testified against him. Cross was sentenced to 11 years, Max to 7, and Tracy to 3 years, reduced from 5 because I testified she warned me when Cross tried to attack from behind. Jose and Miguel, the men Cross hired to plant evidence, were also arrested. Police found incriminating files on their computers, the same ones they'd tried to download onto my phone. Miguel cracked under pressure, confessing everything. Both received long sentences. Cross remained in county jail until his transfer to state prison. Max and Tracy were given 2 weeks to settle affairs before surrendering. Max prepared his family for life without him, hoping for parole in 4 years. Tracy served her sentence in a rural county annex thanks to Jack's negotiations. I let her stay in our house with the kids until she had to report to prison. She spent her last days with them, explaining that Mom made a mistake and has to go away for a while. They were too young to understand it all, but they knew enough. The day before Tracy was set to turn herself in, she asked me to come by the next morning after dropping the kids at school. She wanted me to move back into the house. I arrived at 9 a.m. and rang the doorbell. She opened it quietly. You didn't have to ring, Blake. This is your home. Tracy was dressed simply. A black skirt, white blouse, and gray sweater with flats instead of her usual heels. Minimal makeup, her hair pulled into a neat ponytail, and red, puffy eyes betrayed her hours of crying. But she held herself together while we spoke. By the door sat a small bag. She tried to joke, "That's all I'm taking. I think the state will provide everything else." She led me to the kitchen where she'd laid out a simple breakfast: scones, fruit, coffee, and salad. We made small talk. She mentioned Lucy would be picking her up at 11 a.m. to take her to the sheriff's office. "Lucy's happy to step in for the kids. Don't hesitate to lean on her," she said. Tracy wanted me to move in before the kids got home from school to minimize the disruption. She was unsure about prison visits. "I don't want the kids seeing me in an orange jumpsuit," she said, "but I can't imagine not seeing them for 3 years." She promised to write often and hoped the kids would respond weekly. "Send pictures too," she added. She packed all her belongings into storage containers in the basement and hung family photos in the kids' rooms. "I ordered a new king-size bed for the master bedroom," she said quietly. "It's untouched, new sheets and everything." Her voice cracked as she spoke, her composure slipping. When she started to clear the table, I stopped her. "I'll take care of it later," I said gently. "Let's have coffee in the living room." Realizing time was short, Tracy's remorse became evident. In that moment, she resembled the woman I had married, not the one who'd betrayed me. "Blake," she whispered, "I'm so sorry for everything I did to you. You were the best husband, father, and friend. I made terrible choices, and though Cross manipulated me, I take full responsibility. I feel ashamed. I hope that, in time, you'll forgive me. That's all I can hope for now." She held back tears just long enough to stand. "Do you want more coffee?" she asked softly. Instead of answering, I stepped closer and hugged her. She clung to me, sobbing uncontrollably. We held each other until her crying eased into quiet breaths. Neither of us spoke. A car horn outside broke the silence. Tracy pulled back, wiping her face. "That must be Lucy," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I asked her to honk instead of coming to the door. I need to go." She picked up her bag and sweater, paused at the door, and whispered, "I love you, Blake." I stood in the doorway, watching her walk to Lucy's car. Lucy gave me a small wave, her face serious. I waved back. A moment later, they were gone. I spent the morning moving back into the house. The emptiness was overwhelming. Around 2 p.m., Lucy called, asking if I needed anything. I invited her over. We had a lot to discuss about the kids. Over time, the kids and I settled into our new normal. I became a full-time single dad, and Lucy was a huge help, stepping in as a mother figure. The kids adored her. After a month, we decided it was time for the kids to visit Tracy. Lucy took them first. When they came back, they were excited to have seen their mom, and Lucy said Tracy had been emotional but grateful. Surprisingly, the visit wasn't as traumatic as we'd feared. The prison's visiting area was comfortable, with sofas, toys, and even an outdoor space for meals. Inmates could wear civilian clothes, which eased the tension. I visited Tracy during her 3rd month in prison. To my surprise, I was glad to see her. She was positive around the kids and deeply remorseful when we were alone. She insisted she'd never forgive herself and didn't expect me to either. During one visit, a woman named Candy approached us. Tracy introduced her as a fellow inmate with kids. At one point, Candy laughed and called Tracy stupid. After she left, Tracy explained, "Everyone here calls me that. When they found out I had a great husband, a happy home, and loving kids, and I threw it all away, they decided I'm the dumbest person in prison." She gave a bitter laugh. "They're not wrong." As the months passed, Tracy's behavior remained exemplary. It became clear she'd be eligible for parole in a year. Lucy and I began making plans for her return. Uncle Jack suggested Tracy take online courses to become a paralegal, and she enrolled in a program through the University of Virginia. We even bought a small townhouse near the courthouse with the understanding she'd pay us back. When Tracy was released, Lucy picked her up. The process wasn't family-friendly, but when Lucy pulled up to Tracy's new home, decorated with a welcome home sign, Tracy broke down in tears. Waiting inside were her parents, my parents, the kids, Uncle Jack and his wife. I stayed in the background, letting the kids have their moment. The kids eagerly showed her around her modest new home, furnished with second-hand items, but hers nonetheless. Out back, I was grilling burgers. Tracy joined us, sipping wine, while the kids brought her a plate. Gradually, her tears faded, and she began to settle into the joyful chaos around her. No one mentioned the past. It was an unspoken agreement to focus on the present. Later, Uncle Jack pulled Tracy aside, offering to help with her job search. He'd arranged interviews at several law firms and recommended one in particular, a family practice he thought would suit her. A week after starting at the firm, Tracy invited me over for dinner, alone. I brought a bottle of wine. The house smelled like comfort food, meatloaf with potatoes and peas, my favorite. We talked about everything except what I knew was on her mind. After dinner, we moved to the living room where she finally spoke. "I wanted to talk about us," she said quietly. "What do you think will happen with us?" I took a deep breath. "I don't know, Tracy, but I do know we'll raise our kids together. Having you back has lifted a huge weight off my shoulders. I have time for myself again, and you will too." I met her gaze. "I've dated a bit, nothing serious, but it's been nice. I imagine you'll do the same once you're settled." Her eyes searched mine. "Do you think you'll ever be interested in me again? Like, in that way?" I didn't hesitate. "If you mean marriage, no. Too much has happened. But I've moved on, and I hope we'll always be friends, just friends. We'll never be closer than we are now." Tears welled in her eyes. "I knew it," she whispered. "But I had to try." I nodded. "Eventually, I'll meet someone new and I'll fall in love again. And I hope you will too. You deserve that chance." She wiped her tears and nodded slowly. "I can be happy with that future," she said softly. Before I left, she said, "Thank you for how you've treated me since I came home. You could have kept the kids from me, but you didn't. That makes me regret everything even more." At the door, I turned to her. "You may not realize it, Tracy, but I've forgiven you. I don't hold any anger. I just hope someday you can forgive yourself." Her voice trembled. "Maybe I will, but not soon." We hugged, a warm embrace filled with forgiveness, regret, and acceptance. Then I left, ready to move forward with my life, carrying the lessons of the past with me.